Right hand technique is really something you want to take your time and think about. If you don't have a system for your right hand, you will always have to take a little bit of concentration and focus and think about which finger to use. If you have a system, then that runs on autopilot. There are several different techniques that players use for their right hand, anything from floating thumb technique to playing with additional fingers or even involving the thumb, even for a plucking pattern can be used. I prefer, for my basic grooving setup, a completely independent index middle alternating right hand. Why? There are some spots in music that will use 2 notes per string, and this is what often happens. When players never really think about their right hand, what happens is that their right and their left start to do this synchronous dance. 2 notes for the left hand per string, 2 fingers on the right. So when we're playing a pentatonic, for example, then we are quite happy just linking up the left and the right hand. What that, however, does is that you're really dependent in making your decision what you're going to be using in your right hand from what the music asks of you. And sometimes if we, for example, take a regular scale, then I have sometimes 2 notes, sometimes 3. Depends on how I play the scale, right? So sometimes 2, sometimes 3. Now that's going to throw off your little symmetry. If you're so used to having the right hand respond to what the left hand does, that's obviously very limiting. So I have trained myself meticulously to index, middle, alternate, again, in most situations, and it has served me very well. Sometimes what happens is there is a pattern where it just lies better to play one direction than another. One example for such a thing is octaves. If I have an octave pattern, it's much easier, it lies much better in the hand to have the index finger do the lower string and the middle finger do the upper string. If that were turned around, it goes a little bit against the grain of the hand. Try that for a second, because it's really an interesting feeling in the hand. Whether you go this way, that my arm is relaxed, is sitting there, but if I turn it around, it goes a little bit against the grain of the movement. Now, if I had just a couple of notes in a groove that would do that, I would probably stick with my alternating regimen. If it's a longer section where this, against the grain sort of feel is coming my way, I would most likely reset myself and start that section with the index finger so that the index finger comes out on the bottom. Very important about your right hand is also the fact that it has a big influence on your left hand technique. The right hand and arm can literally take a load off your left thumb. We often overgrip. My basic technique setup, which I've talked about a lot here at Talking Technique as well as in my book and in my courses, is you want your right arm to comfortably be resting on the base body in such a fashion that you can take a load off your shoulder. Anything that leads your arm to make a wing like that or stick up like that might lead you to get tension in the neck and really pain between the shoulder blades. So you want to have your right arm resting on the base body, and then you just gently and naturally grip into your strings. What this does is the weight of the right arm provides a stabilizing effect for the base, and also because the weight is there, it's nothing you have to do, but it slightly provides an impulse towards this direction. So when you push the string down, right, we psychologically we think, oh, it's a big string and whatnot. So we begin to, think we have to counteract that movement of the string going this way, right? But my arm is here and providing a wonderful counterbalance to that movement. These 3 points provide stability for the instrument and help me take a load off the left hand so I don't have to squeeze the wood, and provide the counter movement with the thumb. It really frees up my left hand, and what I also like about it, it gives me a great angle for a really strong tone. When I pluck, I go up and down. If you have anything that, and again, there are special applications. If you play chords, if you play a lot of solo bass, there are places where, other techniques are great. For your regular groove in a band, you will have a better angle, in my estimation, if you are just sitting there with your arm and pluck towards the bass body. It gives you this movement rather than this movement. So that is much more finger-centric, and this more like on this joint, right? Where it says this up and down is a much easier motion, and it's just coming from above a little bit. I sometimes meet people who are really afraid to bend their wrists. Bending, wrists are made to bend. I wouldn't worry about that. Where we run into trouble is when we bend with tension. Tension can always lead to injury, can lead to lots and lots of problems, and we're often not aware of the tension that we are exerting. So when you are having your right arm here, it definitely takes a lot of a load off of your left hand, and that's definitely good for your left. For your right, I would not worry too much about the bending. I would just make sure that you're not working against yourself. Whenever you work against yourself, you create tension, and you can hear the tension. It might lead to injury down the road. And it's not as fun to play when you're working against yourself. The music can't really flow freely. Raking is when you go from one string to the string below without alternating. So you would go middle, middle. And a lot of people think they're alternating, but they really aren't. And the best way to find that out is to actually say M-I, middle, index, middle, index. A good test, quick test you can do is play a scale, play it ascending, index, middle, index, middle, index, middle, index, middle, and now turn it around and descend it. So far, so good, most likely, but now turn around and go index, middle, index, middle, index, middle, index, middle. So that's when often people discover that they are, without planning it, doing this middle, index, middle, middle, right? Now, if that's a conscious choice, if that's something you have practiced, that's one way to go about it. Music throws you a lot of variables, so you want to be ready for as many situations as possible. I just think, you're going up like this. You would not even dream about doubling up on one of the fingers, right? If you are very dependent on left and right being synchronized, you might do index, index, middle in order to fulfill this need to do parallel, to mirror whatever the left hand is doing. But most likely you won't have any problem alternating going up. But so your hand already knows the mechanics of this. Your hand is already doing it. All you need to do is to translate it to the downward motion. So again, in order to really figure it out, I recommend you say it loud, because then you have a check on yourself. Index, middle, index, middle, index, middle, index, middle, right? Raking is a technique that sometimes is voluntary. With dead notes, with, triplets, raking, with certain drops and falls where we're trying to mimic the upright, like for walking bass and such. You might find yourself raking, but then I recommend you practice those kind of scenarios separately. To my ears, raking also sounds a little different versus... So there are artistic exceptions. There are some patterns that you might want to work out for yourself and go with those. Those are all good reasons for raking. Another instance where you might choose to just pluck with one finger, for example, are even 8 notes grooves, for example. If you want it really even if I use all the tricks in the book, angle my fingers so that they're the same length, I pluck. Right now I'm plucking at the exact same spot on my bass. That means I make a little figure 8 movement here so that I get to exactly the same spot, so that my pickups don't pick up a different sound. Even if I use all the tricks in my book, it's going to sound slightly different. So if I want a really super even tone, I might just use one of those fingers. There are certainly instances where I go away from the index middle alternating formula, but for the most part, for grooves, I want to be alternating. Now, what do you do if you have between, let's say, we're playing a pattern like this, right? But now let's say you have a string in between. And then I'm playing G, B, G, C, G, D, and I'm gonna set that G, that note I'm pedaling with, I'm gonna set that to the lower D. Now watch what happens. Would you rake this? Likely not. That would mean you're jumping a string. So most likely you would use two different fingers. I want to be clear on one thing though. I love digging in. I love using heavy gauges of strings. I love, working those strings. I think playing light and playing piano, playing softly, has its place in the practice room as well as on stage, obviously. But sometimes people have made this fact that I'm very careful not to play with tension to mean that I play lightly. Nothing could be further from the truth. You can play without tension. Actually, the more you let the music flow, the more it's gonna, get right through you without any inhibition. That's the idea. So whether I play loud, hard, with a lot of energy and impetus, I love digging in. I love grooving hard. So it has nothing to do with that. It just means I'm not working against myself.